Ho 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 everybody, and welcome to our 2025 Christmas video. Last year we covered mysteries and horrors, but this year we're covering something even more fun. Some of the creatures or odd holiday icons that you might encounter across the globe. Some of which are local variations of Santa Claus, some who will gleefully deliver presents all the same, although in strange ways, but others who might come visit you if you've been, well, less of a good boy this year. Anyhow, quickly, if you want to support this channel, it would mean an awful lot if you liked, subscribed, and commented your favorite holiday cryptid down below. Otherwise, sit back, relax, and grab a hot cocoa, because today we're going to talk about the many weird figures of Christmas tradition. Today, I thought I'd start with a varied topic, the many Christmas cryptids of Iceland. Iceland, to be clear, doesn't just have one Christmas cryptid, but 3, or I guess 16 unless you consider them 3 groups, which are intimately connected. Some terrifying, some mischievous, and some just downright ominous. And today, I'll start this video off by describing this intimately connected saga. First, let's set the scene. On Christmas, in Iceland, the temperatures average just above freezing, and above the multi-foot-high snow piles that line the country's streets, you'll have plenty of time to observe the northern lights, as there will only be about 5 hours of sunlight on a daily basis around this time of the year. This means there's plenty of eerie, cold darkness to conceal the many creatures that call this country home during the holidays. Stories that date back to a time before bright electric lights in modern day, that rather cast back to a time when your home might have been lit by dim candles. Candles which cast eerie shadows, both inside and outside, that might look a little bit like maybe an ogre, or maybe some gnomes, or possibly like a large cat. We'll start with the most ominous of these creatures, an ogress named Grýla, which is the glue that sort of holds these creatures together. Grýla, as noted, is usually pictured as a sort of troll or an ogress, or often sometimes just as a very ugly individual and a beggar. In poems which date back to the 13th century, and texts that connect her to Christmas in the 1600s, she's described as an individual that walks around rural Iceland from family to family, asking families with disobedient children to offer her their kids for culinary purposes. As for appearances, she's often characterized as having goat horns, long goat-like ears, having multiple heads, or having 6 eyes, like a Christmas-themed Upper Moon 1. Of course, you can chase her away with a weapon, or in the child's place give her non-human food, and by that I mean food that isn't human, which will drive her back to her home, often in a remote ice cave in the mountains of Iceland, or in a lava field. But she will always return the following year. If you're unlucky, and you don't manage to drive her away, she'll of course toss your children into a sack, which she brings with her, bringing them back to her cave, where she will cook them into her and her third husband's favorite dish, naughty child stew. This said, while Grýla is perhaps the most menacing Icelandic Christmas figure, she's far from the only one. Rather, there's another group of Christmas creatures that are so pervasive that the Danish government, who governed Iceland in 1746, declared them illegal to talk about, which admittedly didn't get rid of the folklore, but it did make them more tame. This group is composed of the sons of Grýla and her third husband. They are 13 prankster-like figures which each have their own way of causing mischief or delivering gifts, and one by one they will visit Icelandic families and children, arriving between December 12th and Christmas Eve. Like their mother, they will come down from the mountains, often being characterized as looking like trolls, and proceeding into the towns of Iceland. That said, by the 20th century, these lads were less like trolls and more like miniature Santa Clauses with the height of gnomes, borrowing these elements from other cultures. Now, if you're a good kid, you don't need to worry. These men, at least in the modern versions of the stories, will simply give you gifts, placing them in your shoes you've positioned at your windowsill, basically like 13 Santa Clauses. But if you're bad, well, that's another story. Not only will you get a rotten potato in your shoe, but you'll also be subject to the 13 horrors of these so-called Yule lads, which they bring down from the mountains every year. This horror part is why in 1746 the Danish government declared these Yule lads illegal, because they were literally horror figures, which would scare children into thinking they'd be taken and abducted into the mountains just like Grilla would do. Regardless, as far as the tradition goes, this all starts on December 12th, when Sheepcote Cloud, the first Yule lad, comes down to harass the family sheep. He intends to drink their milk, but sadly for him, he has very stiff legs, so he's rarely successful. Admittedly, I'm not sure why having your cow's milk drank is scary, but hey, this is who he is. Then, in a similar light, on the 13th, Gollygawk comes down. Gollygawk steals milk from family homes as well as the family cows, and he spies on families and their cows while hiding in gullies. Stubby comes down on the 14th. Stubby is sort of short, and he steals pans for the food stuck to their bottoms and brims. Then Spoonlicker comes down on the 15th. He, as you might expect, steals wooden spoons that are used for cooking. He's also known to have some serious nutritional issues. Then Pot Scraper comes on the 16th, and he steals pots to scrape out leftovers and eat them. Bowl Licker comes on the 17th and hides under beds, waiting for wooden food bowls to be placed on the ground, usually for the family pet, after which he will run out to consume these scraps. Door Slammer comes on the 18th, and as you might expect, he slams doors. He enjoys this, I guess, and he does this when all are asleep, slamming all of the doors in the house and waking up everyone. Skyr Gobbler comes on the 19th, and he's aptly named as he likes skyr, the regional yogurt that you can now buy at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods for way too much money, and the little dude eats it all up. Sausage Swiper comes on the 20th, and he hides in the rafters and he snatches sausages that are being smoked. Window Peeper comes on December 21st, and he looks in windows for things to steal. Doorway Sniffer comes on the 22nd, and he has a huge nose, which he uses to smell and steal the traditional leaf bread from the Icelandic families. Meat Hook uses a hook to steal meat on the 23rd, dating back to a time when families used to hang meat by the fireplace to dry or cook it. He sticks his little hook down the chimney, and he grabs meat and snatches it upwards. Today, the legend goes, he'll steal the traditional lamb Christmas dinner. And finally, Candlebaker follows children walking outside at night to steal their edible tallow candles, arriving on December 24th. Back in the day, though, this wasn't just simple mischief. Rather, Candlebaker would actually follow children in the dark and steal their candles from their hands, eating these candles and then leaving the kids lost in the darkness. All of these Yule lads, while taking, do supposedly leave candy and other little items for the children of the home, though the last Yule lad, Candlebaker, usually leaves the largest present, and thus is sort of the regional Santa Claus equivalent. And with their mischief complete, these Yule lads will retreat from the cities back to the mountains in the order they came, one by one, starting with Sheepcote Cloud on December 25th and ending in the Feast of the Epiphany on January 6th when Candlebaker leaves. That said, even though on December 24th the Yule lads' mischief has effectively concluded, you're not necessarily safe. Rather, a new creature, perhaps the most dangerous of all of them, will be prowling the streets of towns, walking the empty roads as most are hunkered inside of their homes with families and friends. This story dates back to Old Iceland, when it was generally the expectation that workers finish processing wool before Christmas Eve, after which their boss would often bestow upon them a fresh piece of wool clothing. So in short, this is related to the economic necessity for a successful wool production. Today, because of this, it's generally Icelandic tradition that people get new clothing on Christmas Eve. And, well, there's a reason for this. It's not just the demands of bosses nowadays, but supposedly because something will be lurking on the streets of your town, peering into your window and ensuring that you're wearing a fresh piece of clothing. This creature is the Yule Cat, Grilla's pet, who wanders down like the others from the mountains, and this tiger-sized feline will enter towns, and if it comes across an individual that isn't wearing a new piece of clothes, it will, at least in the old legends, first warn its prey with a large meow, according to the old poems, and will then take these people into the mountains, or sometimes just devour them on the spot. Today, though, this creature just steals your Christmas dinner, which is a little more chill if you ask me. As for the Yule Cat's origins, it's generally not clear if this story actually existed in Icelandic tradition prior to the first edition of Iceland's folktales being published in the 19th century. Regardless, stories of murderous feline are well known today, and theories about why this feline exists vary too, but many think it's related to Freyja, the goddess of love and sorcery in Icelandic mythology, who flies through the skies like Odin in a sled pulled by flying cats. It might also just be related to the fact that cats are far more common of a pet in Iceland than dogs, or possibly it's related to the ghoul cat, a folkloric feline of Iceland that supposedly buries itself in the ground of a cemetery, growing to the size of a dog, before leaving the cemetery, after which it will feed on pretty much anything it sets its sights on. Anyhow, let me know if you know of these creatures, and if you're Icelandic, let me know if there are more details to this folklore than I could find across the internet. Next, we're going to move on to another interesting story. Not necessarily of a creature, but of a man that supposedly exists, that is not only intimately tied to Santa Claus's own origins, but has his own horrifying backstory. A man that in some cultures is said to accompany Santa on his sleigh, and whose entire role on Christmas night is to take Santa's place as the one who punishes children less deserving of gifts. A man known as Per Fwetar, or sometimes as Father Whipper. To tell you the story of Father Whipper, let me first remind you, St. Nicholas is often unofficially regarded as the patron saint of children. And why is this? Well, there's an old story about St. Nick that was first published in the year 1252, and this story, while gruesome, tells of a miracle performed by St. Nicholas and a crime committed by another man. The story goes that somewhere in eastern France, Belgium, or maybe French Switzerland, most often placed in Metz, France, there were 3 boys who together were traveling to a boarding school. They came from a relatively wealthy family, and they meant to make it to the school by day. But these children got lost in whatever city they were in, again, probably Metz, France, and they would stop by a local butcher or innkeeper's residence to ask for directions, or maybe a place to spend the night. Of course, most individuals they would have asked for help probably would have been amiable, maybe even offering them a bed or leading them to their destination. But this evening they were not so lucky. Rather, this man they paid a visit to could immediately tell these boys were wealthy, and fancying himself a quick profit, he would beckon these boys inside, where he would, let's say, do away with them, and depending on the story, he might pickle them in barrels of salt or cook them into a savory stew. Not exactly PG-rated stuff. That said, these boys, while very unlucky, were slightly luckier than this outcome would make you think. They say that while these boys didn't make it to the boarding school this particular evening, St. Nicholas, years later, would feel compelled to visit this inn, or butcher, and somehow realized what had occurred here. Then, through some unknown means, St. Nick would demand these boys rise up while making the sign of a cross, and sure enough, though these boys were either a very old stew or possibly pickled remains at this point, they would somehow be resurrected in their entirety. As for the man who committed this crime, the stories vary, but most say he was cursed to an eternity of penance for his crimes, being transformed into some ugly, ever-living figure, and simultaneously being forced to accompany St. Nick on his future annual Christmas Eve outings, becoming Father Whipper. Nowadays, this Father Whipper is a monstrous man. He wears dark robes, has greasy, smelly hair, a long beard, and of course a whip, or switches, devices he uses to punish children. And also he has a backpack, which he may occasionally use to abduct some poor kid. In short, to describe this Father Whipper figure, if Santa Claus is good cop, Father Whipper is the bad cop. And while most American interpretations of Santa Claus describe your punishment for poor behavior as receiving some lumps of coal or something, Father Whipper is more likely to smack you with one of his implements or abduct you to perhaps consume you later, which I guess Santa Claus allows, despite the fact that he apparently has a distaste for the consumption of kids earlier in the story. I don't know about this particular bit of folklore. More modern versions of this Father Whipper character mellowed up a bit though, and rather than simply abducting and eating kids, he'd just take them to jail. and, well, maybe rip out some body parts along the way that allow individuals to speak. He'd also sometimes cage kids, and sometimes he's depicted with another character at his side, his wife, who is named Mother Flog, who fills a similar role but is maybe a bit nicer, releasing children that have repented and giving good children candy. Anyhow, it's a bit crazy to think that the character of Santa Claus both created and is sometimes accompanied by such a morbid sidekick like Father Whipper. So the Yule Goat is less a cryptid and more of a tradition, but its origins are also sort of wrapped up in very real goats, so I thought it would be a welcome addition to this list of strange Christmas-adjacent figures. So, let me be clear, this isn't certain, but it is possible that Yule Goats are rooted in pagan tradition, though there's no actual evidence to prove that. Rather, people think it's just interesting that this symbol persisted in Scandinavia, and they think it's awfully coincidental that the Romans didn't make it to the oh-so-cold Scandinavia. Thus, Christianity didn't make it to Scandinavia until like 1000 AD. Around the Middle Ages. Therefore, some put forward that more recently than in the rest of Europe, pagan cultural practices were retained in Scandinavia, including possibly the Yule Goat. More evidence for this is that in Norse folklore, goats were downright pervasive. They were sacrificed, they were eaten, and they were even a prominent figure in Valhalla. You know, the whole goat whose udders emit mead to make the dead Valhalla warriors good and drunk stuff. Proper good folklore. Goats also pulled Thor's chariot. Either way, this is just conjecture. We don't really know if these two are actually connected in reality. Regardless of where it comes from, though, it is undeniable that the Yule Goat is a prominent piece of modern Scandinavian Christmas. It's generally a straw animal tied with red ribbons. Often it's a small decoration tied up and used to dress a Christmas tree or on doorsteps, and traditionally these were made from the last sheaf of grain, as a symbol of the end of the harvest season. There was also sort of a game tied to these traditionally, where the Yule Goats would be made and then hidden around the house for others to find, sometimes even on the roof of a home. And then this individual that found them would turn around and hide the Yule Goat themselves, passing it on to someone else. Also connected to the Yule Goat is the tradition of Scandinavian Yule bucking, where folks donning goat-like masks and costumes between Christmas and New Year's would parade door to door with their neighbors, inviting them inside and attempting to identify them, or with the visitors singing Christmas songs. Also, often before the 1700s and 1800s, these folks would commit pagan mayhem, visiting their neighbors' homes and drinking their wine and eating their food. That said, they didn't just take, they would often leave candy or a gift. In many ways, this custom feels a little bit like modern trick-or-treating. And finally, usually after a member of the posse is identified, or after they've had their fill of wine and food, they would then take a member of the family they were visiting with them, dressing them in a costume and mask as well, and they'd move on to the next home, to eat more food and drink more wine. This tradition lived on strongly well into the 20th century, though near its end, Yulebakers got significantly less rambunctious and more Santa-like, giving gifts along their stop rather than simply taking from families. Today, perhaps the best-known aspect of the Yule Goat is the modern Yule Goat, which started in 1966. This Yule Goat is gigantic, and it was first erected in Gävle, Sweden. And the intention is that it would be lit aflame on Christmas. But that hasn't happened. Actually, since it was first erected, it's only been successfully burnt down a few more than a dozen times. Every single other year, it's been destroyed, usually burnt down on another night. Though other times it's been destroyed in other ways, like being hit by a car. This is all despite monumental efforts to defend the goat, such as erecting fences, freezing it so it's less flammable, and even stationing military guards around it. Apparently, nobody cares about the fact that you might be jailed for upwards of 3 months or fined 10,000 USD for burning it. So, in short, they build this massive straw goat, and this massive straw goat is not meant to be destroyed. They really take great precautions to keep it erected through to Christmas. But the tradition of destroying this Yule goat is perhaps more famous than the tradition of lighting it aflame at the proper time. Anyhow, it keeps getting burnt down. It'll probably get burnt down again this year, and I'm pretty sure you can find a live stream of it, so I don't know, maybe you can watch it and catch the moment it gets lit aflame. Anyhow, that is the Yule Goat, a variation of the Yule Goat, and I think it's a really fun tradition. The Nisse is probably one of my favorite Christmas cryptids, and admittedly this might be at least partially due to its presence as a naughty name inspiration for a number of well-known Christmas ales that I just so happen to enjoy around this time of the year. Hey, maybe I'll go down that road on another channel one day. To start, the Nisse goes by a lot of names. In Denmark and Norway, they're called the Nisse. In Sweden, they're the Tomte. And in Finland, they're the Tontu or the Tomtenisse. For simplicity's sake, I'm sticking with Nisse, a name that traces back to an Old Norse word meaning dear little relative or kin, which honestly tells you a lot about how these little creatures were originally viewed. Physically, the Nisse are small, usually only about 2 to 3 feet tall, and they are always male. They're short, they're bearded, they're usually described as elderly looking and dressed in simple farmer's clothing, and often they're topped off with a red cap. Think less jolly mall Santa and more grumpy, immortal farmhand who's been watching you mess things up for generations or something. As for their abilities, they're not exactly pushovers. Some traditions claim they're shapeshifters, capable of growing larger than a man if they so choose, or just being their normal small selves. They're also said to possess immense strength, and that they're stronger than any human, even if they're small, and that if they bite you, turns out they're poisonous. Further, they have glowing eyes and pointed ears. Also, despite their reputation for being mischievous or a little bit outright naughty, the Nisse are, and originally were, more like guardians. They're believed to have originated in the forests of the area, but over time they moved into farmhouses and barns, attaching themselves to specific homesteads, and if treated properly, most importantly being fed porridge with a generous slab of butter, they would reward the household by protecting crops and tending to livestock, and just generally ensuring a farm's prosperity. Further, if you dig deeper, things get even more interesting. In many traditions, the Nisse isn't just a creature. It's sort of the ever-living spirit of a deceased relative, or sometimes the ghost of a long-dead hired farmhand who never really left the land. They were especially fond of horses, too, and it was said that you could always identify a Nisse's favorite horse simply by finding the best-groomed, healthiest horse in the stable. On the flip side, though, if livestock were neglected by a farmer or mistreated, the Nisse would make absolutely sure that you regretted it. There was even a custom of making the Nisse a bed on Christmas Eve, and setting a place for him at the table, because, again, this wasn't a monster so much as a powerful, easily offended member of the household. When Christianity spread through Scandinavia, that guardian ancestor role slowly faded, though. But the Nisse didn't disappear. But it did change. He became something closer to a gremlin mixed with Santa, less sacred protector and more unpredictable holiday menace with opinions. In short, Christianity sort of vilified the Nisse. Thus, in modern folklore, the Nisse is often portrayed as a gnome-like Santa figure, who goes from house to house, sometimes accompanied by the Yule Goat, which in older traditions was an actual goat unlike the ones we just talked about, and just like in the past, families would leave out porridge with butter for him, and in return the Nisse would ideally bring good fortune and a prosperous year ahead. This is a tradition that many people in Sweden still observe today. There are, of course, cautionary tales, though. One famous folktale tells of a farmer who forgot to add butter to the Nisse's porridge, or at least that's what the Nisse thought. Offended beyond reason, the Nisse promptly killed the farmer's best cow, only then to eat the porridge without the butter and discover the butter was actually at the bottom of the bowl, and then realizing his mistake, he went out and stole an identical cow to replace it. Problem solved mostly, I guess, other than much of the art regarding this shows the farmer finding the dead cow and being confused because there was another identical cow. Then there's another story that tells of a maid who ate the Nisse's porridge herself, and was punished by being forced to dance with the Nisse all night long, which sounds whimsical until you remember he's supernaturally strong, immortal, and extremely petty. Today, for those hoping to minimize naughtiness and maximize good fortune, the tradition here remains simple though. You just leave out a bowl of porridge with butter on top of it on Christmas Eve, and you treat the Nisse well, and he might just treat you well in return. And it's widely believed this custom may even be the origin of our modern tradition of leaving out milk and cookies for Santa, just with slightly fewer threats of livestock murder these days. Keeping things interesting, I'm going to move on to another topic, which I'm just going to call the Christmas poopers, but I might also call what the hell is going on in Catalonia. Anyhow, in Catalonia, there's an odd trend, and we've sort of talked about this before, but there are two Christmas-associated icons that happen to poop out Christmas presents here. The first is a little creature named Tio de Nadal, or the Christmas log. He's a log with legs often found in the Catalonia region of Spain that literally poops out presents. This strange saga usually begins on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, on December 8th, after which every evening the Tio is given a little bit of food and wrapped in a blanket to stay warm. Children have to keep this little log warm and feed him every night. And then on Christmas Eve, or sometimes Christmas Day, the log will be beaten, sometimes with a stick, or other times simply spanked over and over, which supposedly will cause the log to defecate, in addition to being sang one of the many poop-related songs regarding Tio de Nadal. I will leave my dignity behind and sing it for you here, just replacing a certain word that starts with SH with the word poop so that I can monetize this video. Here I go. Poop, Tio, hazelnuts and nougats, do not poop herrings, for they are too salty. Poop, nougats, for they taste better. Poop, Tio, almonds and nougats, and if you don't want to poop, I will hit you with the stick. Poop, Tio! Yep, that's the song. Then the children must go pray somewhere else in the home, or they must go warm their sticks in the kitchen or next to a fire in the home, and then by the time they return to Tio, the Tio has pooped out some desirable goods. Now, usually these aren't big presents, rather they are candies, nuts, or small toys. Usually it's just gifts that are shared by the family, rather than the actual Christmas presents. Further, also in Catalonia, is a figure reported as the Caganer, who is a figure depicted as pooping that is often put in nativity scenes in Catalonia and neighboring areas. His name is El Caganer, literally meaning the pooper, and he's just a peasant, wearing a red Catalan hat with his butt exposed and pooping. The tradition of putting this by a nativity scene dates back to the 17th and 18th century, and in European countries there are often large models of the city of Bethlehem, in addition to nativity scenes, and this pooper is an essential part of this tradition, though I guess it's less of a cryptid or Santa-like figure than the Christmas log. But hey, what's up with all this poop in Catalonia? Mary Lwyd is a tradition that feels less like a holiday custom and more like something you'd engage in Halloween. It feels pretty overtly pagan if you ask me, but whether or not it is, it's pretty unclear. Regardless, it's worth clearing up one detail. Mary Lwyd isn't actually the name of this monster, it's the name of the tradition itself. It's a strange sort of ritualized performance that has survived in bits and pieces for centuries. At its center is the Mary Lwyd figure, which is usually made from an animal's skull, most often a horse, sometimes a cow's skull too, mounted on the end of a pole, with a white sheet or sackcloth draped over the pole and down over the person carrying it, completely obscuring the performer. The skull itself is often elaborately decorated with glass eyes, ribbons, bells, or colored streamers that gives it a mix of festivity and an ominous flair. It's cheerful, it's sort of horrifying, and ultimately it's just a horse's skull staring directly into your soul. This tradition is tied to something called wassailing, which dates back to the Middle Ages. Wassailing involves a group of people going house to house during the winter months, singing, drinking, and exchanging good wishes for the coming year. In many ways, it's the ancestor of modern Christmas caroling that's just a lot louder, drunker, and involving skeletal livestock. And frankly, it's pretty similar to Yule balking, which we talked about earlier. Wassailing itself is very old. Variations of it are referenced as far back as the 8th century, and it even appears in Beowulf. By the 14th century, it had become a widespread custom across Britain, but in parts of Wales, the tradition evolved in a particularly unusual direction. Because in a Mary Lwyd procession, when someone knocks on your door, you don't just open it up to find smiling neighbors in scarves. You find a horse's skull perched atop an impossible height, snapping its jaw and bobbing towards you, while a group of people stand by it, fully committed to this situation. So this group is usually led by a well-dressed individual that's often carrying a staff or dressed in finery, and it might include other costumed characters as well. And when they reach a house, the visitors and occupants engage in a call-and-response song, traditionally sung in Welsh, and this exchange, called a punco, is essentially a battle of improvised rhyming verses, the Mary Lwyd and her entourage asking to be led inside, while the people in the house responding with increasingly elaborate reasons why they aren't going to let the Mary Lwyd inside. This goes on for a while, but eventually, inevitably, the household loses the lyrical battle and must allow the group to enter, and then, once inside, all pretenses drop. The wassailers are given food and drink, and the Mary Lwyd creature chases both children and adults around the room, snapping its jaw and raining chaos. Now, as for where the Mary Lwyd actually comes from, that's where things are admittedly probably a bit lost to time. Some have suggested it's a remnant of pre-Christian pagan tradition, possibly tied to winter festivals or even Samhain, given the imagery of death and rebirth implied by a dead horse returning to life. That said, there's no solid evidence linking it directly to ancient pagan worship, and most scholars are cautious about making that leap. The truth is, the origins of Mary Lwyd remain unclear. Heck, even the name is debated. Many believe Mary comes from mare, meaning a female horse, while Lwyd translates to grey, making grey mare a likely interpretation. Others point to frequent references to the Virgin Mary in songs associated with the tradition, suggesting the name might have been Christianized over time. And confusingly, and very on brand with this tradition, both explanations may be true at the same time. The earliest written records of Mary Lwyd date to the 19th century, and they're not flattering. At the time, the practice was condemned by religious authorities as immoral, disorderly, and inappropriate, and for much of the 20th century it was actively discouraged and faded in many areas as Christianity tightened its grip on rural Welsh communities. But the Mary Lwyd didn't disappear despite this. In the mid-1900s, interest in Welsh folklore surged, helped along by works like Vernon Watkins' poem The Ballad of the Mary Lwyd, as well as appearances in modern literature and pop culture. Eventually, this tradition began to re-emerge, not necessarily as a threat to Christianity, but as an elaborate piece of cultural heritage. Thus, today, Mary Lwyd processions still take place in parts of Wales during the winter months, especially around Christmas and New Year's. While the connection to Christmas is loose at best, the timing stuck, and the imagery of a skeletal horse demanding entry into your home feels perfectly appropriate for the darker side of the year. And yes, for anyone wondering, the Mary Lwyd has made her way into Dungeons & Dragons, where she's been reimagined as an undead horse creature. I know some of y'all build campaigns based on my stories of folklore, so I hope you appreciate that. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this quick trip through some of Christmas's strangest creatures. And I'm sorry I didn't cover Krampus, but everybody covers Krampus, so I wanted to do something a little bit different. Anyhow, without further ado, if you celebrate, I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Otherwise, I hope you have a happy holiday season, and of course a New Year of your own. Also, if you want to give me an awesome Christmas present, all you've got to do is like this video, subscribe, and comment to see more like this soon. Otherwise, whether you just woke up on Christmas morning and realized you forgot to put butter on the Nisse's porridge, or if you saw a very large cat roaming around outside and you realized you didn't get any clothes for Christmas, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.